Okay. All right, well, good morning, everybody. Good to have you all here, and great to have you joining us if you're tuning in via the internet. Great to have you joining us from week to week, everybody. Friends from all over the world. The family is growing. So, but as always, we want to open with a word of prayer, so let me invite you to just pause for a moment, and let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we want to thank you once again for the breath of life this morning and very many blessings to us. You take such good care of us. We thank you for your great love and for the marvelous plan that you have put in place that's revealed in your word. And that plan even called for your personal involvement, coming here and paying a price that we could not pay. And so thank you, Lord, for all that you do, all that you have done, all that you will continue to do. Thank you for your promise to come and rescue us from this sinful world. We're praying and trusting that that will indeed take place in the very near future. And as we open your word this morning, we ask and pray that your Spirit will be here to inspire us, to teach us, to help prepare our hearts for what lies ahead, and to prepare us spiritually, to use us in the finishing of your great work. So accomplish that in us, and thank you for all that are here, all that are tuning in. And may we all receive the blessing that you've stored up for us, and we ask it in Jesus' most wonderful name. Amen and amen.
Amen.
All right, so anybody want to share any experiences that they had this past week? They decided to use this opening time to talk about how the Lord's working in our lives and on our hearts. And you folks out there too, if you had some interesting experiences, we know that God is working in everyone's life, whether they recognize it or not. But it's encouraging. We want to take this time to encourage one another, especially as we see difficulties and things unfolding that the book of Revelation reveals. It's going to be important for us to encourage one another, no matter where we are, no matter what culture we live with. That's going to be an important part of us persevering. The Bible talks a lot about perseverance, and we need to be encouraging one another in that regard. So, any interesting things happen? Anything you'd like to share? Don't be shy.
Have you heard the news?
Well, there's a lot of news out there. What are you referring to?
Well, the United States and England and France, they put, I don't know, 50, 60, maybe more rockets into Syria
Oh, they
over that, them gassing their own people, and
yeah,
that just happened
must have been last night.
last night.
Yeah. Did they? I hadn't.
Well, they didn't say anything about it
Yeah.
up till 10 o'clock last night.
I see.
But
Yeah.
it's on there this morning.
Yeah. You know, the thing of it is, Ken, I guess that the president, obviously, who makes that decision for that to take place, I guess he believed that the information that he received was credible and so forth. It's despicable that any leader of any country, particularly,
Yeah.
would use chemical weapons. They've been outlawed for quite a while, and supposedly
Killing their own people.
they had over 200 then when they were outlawed. Supposedly they had over 200 nations sign off on the illegality of using chemical weapons on people.
Well, England and France, they each one of them shot quite a few rockets, you know.
So they all, collectively. Yeah, and that's an important part of having others around the world. It's just not the United States doing this kind of thing in response. And there's probably a lot of mixed emotion out there and opinion about whether that was the proper thing to do, whether that was the proper response, and should we do something that would cause greater escalation? With, of course, I know from the United Nations standpoint, the United Nations tried to get several resolutions passed, and they were vetoed by Russia, which has veto power. So, you still have the Russians, of course, and the Iranians are going to side with the Syrians naturally.
What are we really? They call them rebels, but what are we really talking about? Are we talking about Christians or Muslims?
Well, the ideology
What's happening?
One of the ideologies that is presented is the Shiite and Sunni differences. And basically you have two different religious ideologies there, Shiite and Sunni, that, like Christian and Muslim, are going to kind of butt heads together, and there's going to be tension between the two. A lot of people think that's the real issue over there. It's a difference in ideology.
Well, that really bothers me whenever you see all these little kids, ain't more than 2 years old, that's been gassed to death, suffocated in the...
Yeah. Ken, I mean, there are such atrocities that take place around the world, whether the news media gets it exactly right, we don't know definitively whether they always get it right. And of course, over here in this country, we have a lot of things that happen that are staged. Crisis actors come in and they run these drills, and things are staged, but it's presented to the American people as if it were a real event. And again, it's used to raise money. People put these GoFundMe pages up, and people make, even today, for example, even though the Sandy Hook incident that occurred, what was that? That was probably, a year or two ago? Even though that has been well documented to have been a staged event, there are still people making donations and collecting money as if it were something that really occurred.
Titus was saying that the U.S. used sarin gas in Vietnam.
Yeah, we've been just as guilty in a lot of cases as other people. Yeah, and Titus was actually there, so he was from Florida. He was in the military at that point, so he knows firsthand and experienced. I mean, we were spraying Agent Orange all over the place.
Yeah, and he was saying that destroyed the trees, the jungle, the rice crops, and other vegetation, or just all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what we decide.
We were spraying Roundup is what we were spraying.
Spraying Roundup, yeah. It's amazing what we were doing to ourselves, or that we're comfortable with doing to ourselves. And sometimes when we would do something, oh, that's okay, but then let somebody else do it, and it's not okay. So there often can become a double standard. Let's just face it, humanity, we're all one blood, the Bible says, and humanity is corrupt at the core. I mean, we are sinful. We are sinful at the core, and we're selfish at the core, and we take advantage and do things that are totally inappropriate and wrong and tragic. So it's hard to say what the fallout will be, but there's no question that sending missiles any place, whatever the reason and whatever the motive, there are other people that are going to interpret that as aggression and imperialistic kind of aggression, and they're going to hate this country for that, right? And so the conflict and contention, right? It's just everywhere. It's going to last until the Lord comes and puts an end to it.
I hope, real soon.
Yeah. The big push for globalism, a lot of people out there that push globalism, okay? And globalism has a hold on, even lots of our universities in this country, that agenda is really pushed. And one of the main things that they hold up as the advantage of globalism is that, right now you have, I think the latest count was like 192 different sovereign nations out there, supposedly sovereign nations out there. And the globalists say, look, if there was one global government, one global entity, who are you going to fight against? If there are no sovereign nations any longer, and there's one global community, who are you going to fight against? I mean, there are always going to be, individuals and little groups going against one another. But from a nation standpoint, I mean, that's the big argument that they make, But here's the thing, and of course we see all social media, of course, pushing society in that with that agenda as well. But here's the thing: when Nimrod brought his group up to where the Tower of Babel, where that city, they were going to build a city and a tower around near the Euphrates there, that particular area, southern Turkey was the actual location. Here you had this group of people, and you had a unified world in a sense that the world spoke one language at that time, and you got masses of people that are going to be coming along. So the world was definitely moving in a direction where it would be totally unified. The Tower of Babel was quite a symbol of that. What was God's response to that? This is in Genesis chapter 11. This is after the flood, of course. As men began to again multiply on the face of the earth.
Confused their languages.
He confounded their language so that what? I mean,
so they spread out.
Yeah, they would go off in different directions. Okay, and so God's answer to this one world system was, no, we need to spread people out. We need to get people going in different directions. Why would God be so concerned? What's the real issue about one world system, and one global type of government? What's the real issue there?
Because one bad apple corrupts the bushel.
Well, what would be the... now, of course, we have to go back thousands. The Tower of Babel incident occurred, nearly 4,000 years ago. About 4,000 years ago. So what would be the real issue, particularly then?
They could pass laws for everybody and keep their thumb on top of them.
Okay, and of course, the real issue is who's in charge of that global system, ultimately. Who's the ultimate leader of that global system? Satan. Okay. So yeah, Satan would much prefer to have one entity that he can corrupt and coerce than to have to try to coerce 200 different sovereign nations, right? So yeah, much easier to control one group and to coerce and distort the thinking of one group and pass subsequent laws down on everybody that are opposed to God's law, right? Yeah. Much easier to do that with one. So yeah, so God stepped in and confounded the languages so that we end up with 200 different sovereign nations eventually. Now obviously those sovereign nations are going to fight against one another at times, but and of course you go back through history, what you recognize in history is that certain people come along, and of course the globalist agenda never died. Even from the Tower of Babel, even from Nimrod, the globalist agenda never went into obscurity. It never died. There was always this thinking that this was the way to go. And of course, the elites picked that up along the way, and they said, we have the means. We have when you have a lot of money, when you have a lot of means, then you have a lot of power, and then you can start using that to go in a certain direction. You've always had that going on, and so that's why you had the Hitlers and the Mussolinis and the Pol Pots and the different, quote, dictators that all tried to do what? What did Napoleon try to do? What did Alexander the Great try to do? What did these guys all try? What were they all trying to do? Conquer the world, right? They all wanted to have this world empire. And so we've never lost that thread, that thinking of globalism. But what was the result? When you look back in history, what was the result of Alexander the Great and Nebuchadnezzar and even more contemporarily Hitler and Mussolini? What's the result of all of that conflict? It's conflict and contention, and when you get pushed, you push back. And so you say, I'm a citizen of the world. I have a right to think and be governed by the way I think it should be happening. And so
I think it's a mentality also of like it's safety in numbers. So having one nation would be safety in numbers, what people would think.
well, the point is there was always resistance. Satan tried to unify the world militarily. And you always had a resistance that was present. I think God inspired. I think that was God inspired because God never wanted a one world system until He was the one in charge.
Well,
Right?
yeah.
And so God had to let a period of time, probationary time, play out. We've talked about the sequence of time that had to play out. And of course, God will allow things to develop to a place where eventually He'll step in and set up His own kingdom, His own world, government, etc. That's what we're hoping for. That's what we're waiting for.
Titus was saying
But-
that the Tower of Babel would never work because at about 40,000 feet they'd start peeling off from oxygen, for lack of oxygen.
Right. Well, I think that part of their thinking, of course, you got to remember Nimrod. Who was Nimrod? Who was his relative? Who was his grandfather? Who was Nimrod's grandfather?
No.
No, Noah.
Yeah.
Noah was Nimrod's grandfather. So and Ham's, he was Ham's son. So he had an opportunity. I believe that's correct. He was Ham's son. But anyway, he's the grandson of Noah, and so he had information and knowledge about the flood, about the pre-flood events, and so forth. And so I think he was just trying to take the tower up above the level of what the water was.
Nimrod was the son of Cush.
Cush?
Cush.
Okay, Nimrod's son of Cush. Thank you for that correction. And Cush was the son of Ham?
Probably.
Yeah. All right, well, that would have
Grandfather.
made him a great-grandfather then. Yeah, okay. Great-grandfather then. So, sorry.
Yeah, Cush was one of the sons of Ham.
Okay, so okay, thank you for that correction. So, yeah, we got to get that straight. So, Nimrod was a great-grandson. So, not too far removed still from the flood.
Yeah.
He would have had insight and understanding. But I think he was trying to take the tower up not just above where the flood waters. They were thinking that, if another flood comes, it'll be about the same kind of thing, and we need to take a tower up. But at any rate, very absurd thinking. I think that's what Titus is saying there. How absurd to think that you could kind of even build a tower that would survive a flood of that
Yeah.
magnitude. Tower would never be able to withstand that anyway. So anyway, but the thing of it is, the whole point that we got off on here was that Satan is trying to control one entity. God will eventually, at some point, allow that to happen. But at the appropriate time, when then He steps in shortly thereafter and puts it to a final end and rescues the righteous, etc. So, but that's the real fallacy in all of that. And it's just unfortunate that we still have nations fighting against nations today. But we're also seeing a coalition of people coming together, like the Russians and the Iranians and the Syrians and the Jordanians probably and the Egyptians and the Turks. I mean, they're all your Muslim nations are going to come together to try to have a caliphate, because again, it's religious ideology, isn't it?
It's religion.
It's religious ideology. It's good against evil, light against darkness. It's that kind of thing that's always been around and always taken place. All right, so I want you to be thinking about not only things in the news, keeping one eye open on that kind of thing, but I also want you to be also keeping an eye open on how God is working in your life in a very particular way, and coming together and sharing those kind of things with the group and ultimately with those that are watching online there, because we do need to be inspiring one another. Things are really going to start intensifying. We are getting to a place in history where lots of things are going to be taking place because probationary time is running out.
Yeah.
Quite literally, it is running out, right? All right, so nothing is going to inform us more fully to that effect than a study in the book of Revelation, and that's, of course, where we've been for the last half year. And we've come up to chapter 8, and we've come up to the time of the trumpet. You see, I still have the board up here. And I do want to just continue to emphasize that the book of Revelation, in order to really understand the ultimate truth that's revealed in the book of Revelation, and I'm not talking about, there's lots of opinions and lots of suggestions in terms of applications that can be made. And they've been made all through history, particularly since the first century. Since Victorinus wrote his commentaries on the book of Revelation in the 3rd century, there have been lots of suggestions as to what the book of Revelation means and who are the players and who's involved, etc. What are the events taking place? But again, it's a Hebrew book, and we have to consider the Hebrew exegesis. Multiple applications are going to be there and maybe obvious, but they're all pointing to an ultimate fulfillment. And that's what we've been concentrating on because we are running out of time. We need to understand the ultimate. Instead of looking back in history at applications, we want to look to the ultimate fulfillments. And that's what we've been doing. One of the things that's important to understand is that the book of Revelation is set up and structured. It's important to understand the foundation and the framing of the book, just like in any building that you would have. The foundation needs to be sure. The framing defines the foundation more directly, okay, specifically. The book of Revelation, the foundation is what I left this diagram of the sanctuary, the tabernacle here, up. I don't know how easily you can make that out on the camera, but the foundation of the book of Revelation is the sanctuary service, and more specifically, when you cross-section each section of the sanctuary, you have in this section, the main consideration in the outer court was the blood. The main consideration in the sanctuary proper is the most holy place and the Ark of the Covenant. So you have the law and the blood are the two main considerations for the sanctuary. That is what is the foundation of the book of Revelation. This is the song, as we'll concentrate when we get further into chapter 15 and 16, this is the song that the 144,000 learn. This is the song that they sing, okay, that they learn in chapter 15 and 16 when we get, obviously after probation closes and toward the plagues. But you have to understand the way the book is framed, okay? And the book is framed just like the plan of salvation is set up on a 6-to-1 ratio. It's interesting, even though they say that the chapters and so forth are not inspired, it's just fascinating to me that the book of Revelation is really set up in that way. It's framed in a 6-to-1 ratio. And one of the things that Simeon brought out last week was that here you have, at the close of probation, here you have chapter 14, right? And what's the number 14? The number 14 is a double 7. So here you have everything coming down to that, at the close of probation, to an understanding of that double 7. So it's just fascinating the way that ends
Seven's
up.
also, 21 on another multiplication.
Right.
It's another plus.
Right. So you've got 6-to-1, 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 and then a summary. The half of chapter 22 in the book of Revelation is really a summary, bringing us back to the first chapter. Because when you go into the first chapter of the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 3, it simply says, there's a blessing on those who read, those who hear, those who read, those who study and do the things that are listed here. Because it says, for the time is at hand. Well, the time that's referring to is this time right here. That's the main focus, the main event that the book of Revelation reveals. That's not something that's happened in the past. right? Or is it? Is the ultimate close of probation something that's happened in the past? No, just applications. The flood event was an application of the closing of probation. The destruction of Jerusalem was an application of the closing of probation. The death of Jesus was a closing of probation. You know, for individuals, for cities, for worlds. Okay, so you have all those applications. What they are pointing to, an ultimate time when probationary time would end. That is still yet future. Okay, so you can see how that works. Chapter 22. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. That's that declaration of that ultimate close of probationary time that involves all of humanity. Right? All of humanity. The dead and the living, the good and the bad. You know, that's why there are four things represented there. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He that is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. He that is holy, let him be holy still. That involves those four categories. Okay, it's the ultimate close of probationary time. That's that, and then behold, I come quickly, for my reward is with me. So that's, you can see how the whole book is tied together. Basically, concerning that particular event, the ultimate close of probationary time. That is the most important, the most significant thing that people today need to understand. Right? There's going to be a declaration of that in the future. So you've got the first 6 chapters focusing on the revelation of the Messiah, his mission, the things that, because people do not understand the complexity and the totality of what the Messiah ended up accomplishing. Before probationary time closes, there's going to be a greater revelation of what he did and why he did it, etc. Then you go into the time just before probation closes. Of course, the introduction of those that will stand through all of this is there in chapter 7. We went through that for a couple, 3-4 weeks. And then you have the beginning of a series of events that are designed, to wake up the people of this planet, wake up the people in the world, get their attention for this event about to occur, probationary time about to occur. It's going to be a devastating time. In fact, the more I really look into this and consider and contemplate and start thinking through all of these particulars, I can completely understand why pastors, teachers, theologians, Bible students, I can completely understand why they would want to stay away. Or let's focus on the applications. Let's focus on something that happened 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago in history, because then it's not very real to us, right? It's not contemporary for us. It's not something that we're going to go through necessarily. Too bad for that circumstance. Too bad for those individuals that went through an horrific time, whether it been a natural disaster or warfare or whatever it might be. Okay, we're so far removed from that hundreds of years ago. It's not like it's very real. But let me tell you, there are plenty of places in the world today, right now, even as I'm speaking, that are experiencing some really nasty stuff, such as what you saw in the news. Okay, really nasty things. And it's very real to them.
It's going to get worse too.
Very real to them. But I can understand why pastors and teachers and Bible students would kind of stay away, or make an application in past, because it's negative, it's unpleasant, it's tragic, it's horrible, right? We want to focus on God's love and being kind, and we want to focus on things that are positive and looking, but what's coming? What does Revelation say ultimately is coming? The really bad stuff. Okay? And so people don't want to focus on that. I get it. But Christians need to recognize that they'll have greater, by understanding these things more fully, they'll be better prepared just to be able to physically tolerate the kind of things that are actually coming. I understand why people don't like to talk about it. Why some people stay completely out of the book of Revelation. Some people will teach, hey, the church isn't even going to be here for most of all this nasty stuff. So we don't even need to talk about it. We don't need to worry about it. You got all that. You got all that kind of thing out there. So, but actually, the reality is, God's people, like Daniel went to the lion's den, and like Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego went into the fiery furnace. The world is going to be subjected to a time of trouble, and then after probation closes, a great time of trouble. The miracle, the absolute miracle and glory of it all will be that God will preserve His people through it. And of course, particularly the 144,000, He will miraculously preserve through it. I can understand why people don't want to look a little more specifically at some of these terrible things. In fact, because they are terrible. But it's important for us to understand what's coming, or else it wouldn't have been in the book. God wouldn't have put it in the book if it wasn't something that we needed to know. Does that make sense?
Right, it tells you.
Okay. I mean, even though there are lots of people that don't want to see it and don't want to hear it and don't want to do it, right? God said it's there for a reason, right? And so we need to take it very seriously.
I think it also could contradict some of the teachings that people do too.
Yeah.
Because this can address some of the stuff that people are like, wait, don't we teach against that?
Yeah, I've kind of put you'll understand why in just a little bit, but I put kind of a title on this particular lesson here called Fear the Pit and the Snare. Fear the Pit and the Snare. You'll understand why that is a little bit later. But what we want to do, John, remember, John is a student, John the Revelator. He is a student of the Old Testament scrolls, right? He's had the privilege of going through lots of Old Testament scrolls and having, of course, a Jewish upbringing, Hebrew upbringing, so forth. And so as John is being inspired through the Holy Spirit to record these things and to jot these things down, part of what he is putting, part of the ink that he's putting on paper there, or parchment, is stuff that he's had in his head from the Old Testament. I want us to go back to before we get started, more specifically in chapter 8. I want to go back and understand where John could be coming from. Go back to Isaiah. Go back in the Old Testament. I want to go to Isaiah first, or let's see. Isaiah and Jeremiah are two books. They were contemporaries. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all contemporaries, all living.
Isaiah what?
We're going to go to Isaiah 24, and I'm just going to take you to two places. Yeah, we'll go to Isaiah 24 first. Isaiah chapter 24, and come down around about verse 16 there. It says, everybody there? Isaiah chapter 24. Okay. For the ends of the earth we have heard songs. I'm reading from the New King James. For the ends of the earth we have heard songs. Glory to the righteous. For God's people, it is going to be a glorious time, but when is that glory going to be experienced?
At the resurrection. Probably.
At the resurrection, after the Messiah actually shows up. Okay? But before that time, just prior to that time for him showing up, it's going to be a little bit of a different story here. Look what he says here. But I say, this is Isaiah here going on, glory to the righteous, but I say, I am ruined, woe is me, woe to me. Right? The treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously. Indeed, the treacherous dealers have dealt very treacherously. So does that sound like a very positive time? Does that sound like
Sounds like the original Dr. Seuss.
a real... So for a lot of people, there's a story out in the news, Ken, this week, that the 23rd of this month is when the rapture is going to occur. Another one of those predictions that's out there this week in the news.
Wow.
The 23rd of... Okay, so for somebody who believes that the 23rd, which is what, next weekend, something like that?
Week
The
after
blow-up dolls
next
and the
week.
helium.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, for all those people that believe that,
Yeah, it's a week
it's
after
all over, but if they can just survive one more week, they're going to glory, right? They'll be in glory. But Isaiah's saying here, not so fast. There's going to be a lot of treachery. In fact, he says, "Woe."
God
Well,
can
alas,
save
woe
you
is me,
from it.
is what he's basically saying there, right? And look what he goes on to say here. And this is the reason for the title of the message this week. Verse 17, "Fear and the pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the United States, Afghanistan,
Whole earth.
the earth," right? "Fear and the pit and the snare are upon you, O inhabitant of the earth." Isaiah's saying, hey, not so fast, everybody. Yeah, it's going to be glorious when the Lord shows up and when people are rescued and they're resurrected. What a glorious, blessed event that's going to be. That's what Titus says, Titus 2. We're looking for the blessed hope and the glorious appearing of our great God, okay? But Isaiah's saying, now, wait just a second here. You have to just be reminded here that before that actually happens, there's going to be a very difficult time, right? Let's go on here. "And it shall be that those who flee from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit, and he who comes up from the midst of the pit shall be caught in the snare." Right? So, in other words, Isaiah is saying here, when things start happening, when treacheries start taking place, and woes start falling, there is going to be no escape. Okay? No escape. "For the windows from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth are shaken." Well, that almost sounds like the time of the flood. I mean, this is an example. He's giving an example here. This is what occurred during the time of the flood, right? That's an application. That's an example of what will take place. Here's a global event. Probationary time is closing for the entire world, right? The righteous are what? The righteous are sealed in the ark. See, this is all exemplary of what's going to take place at
It's
the end,
funny how you said there's no escape.
right?
Like Noah escape.
No, it does escape, right? Now look at verse 19. "The earth is violently broken. The earth is split open. The earth is shaken exceedingly. The earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, and shall totter like a hut. Its transgressions shall be heavy upon it, and it will fall and not rise again." So, you can imagine a little grass hut standing and an earthquake occurring, and that thing being just shaken, right? And the wind picking up, and the rain, everything's beating against it, and it's just going to just be decimated. Okay? He's saying that not only occurred during the time of the flood, but it will occur again, right? It will occur again. The ultimate will be even... Why will the ultimate be even more horrific than the time of the flood?
Because this time it's not going to get back up.
This time it's not going to get back up, right? And there are probably several billion people more. There are several billion structures more, perhaps. In other words, you have
More cottages to knock
you
over.
have more calamity because you have much more to be calamitous against. Okay?
Can you imagine being on the top of the Empire State Building when it starts shaking?
No, thank you. Okay. Now look, it says, "It shall come to pass," verse 21, "in that day, that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones, and the kings of the earth, and on the earth, the kings of the earth, they'll be gathered together." All. So there will ultimately, when this occurs, there will be a one world system. There was a world system at the time of the flood, and of course they tried to repeat that not very long after, hundreds of years after the flood. They tried to repeat that. God stepped in. because he knew he had a timetable. He knew thousands of years were going to go by of probationary time. And so, but he would eventually, we'd end up at the same place. You know, Facebook. I'll just put a plug in for Facebook here. Facebook really is, and the internet directly, and the internet maybe indirectly, but Facebook specifically is bringing society back into that one world focus. Okay, what's Facebook's main agenda? Connecting everybody. Oh, we want to connect everybody, even if it means detrimental connections. We want everybody connected, right? They're bringing it. It's technology bringing us back to the Tower of Babel, to that same scenario. Okay.
They're also, I heard in the news this week that they're putting kind of a chip in your hand down in Florida, so people can't steal your credit card identity and all that.
Yeah, the next thing, in fact, one of the things that they're doing away with in the news that you probably heard is you know, when you go to, even if you use a credit card, most people used to swipe them. Now they're just doing with the chips, right? See, that's an intermediary step.
Well, not even that. Now you have your phone where you just wave your phone.
Yeah, that's
So
an
you can-
intermediary
you
step
can-
to have a phone, and then eventually, I think even after the phone thing, is going to be something in your hand,
Yeah,
a chip in your
that's
hand,
right.
whatever that you can swipe. So you can see these intermediary steps.
They don't have they're doing away with the credit card. They put the chip in
That's
your
right.
hand.
In fact, you don't even have to sign. You don't
Right.
even have to. You don't have to sign checks anymore. You
Yeah.
don't have to sign credit card slips anymore. They're phasing all that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Getting rid of your signature.
Yeah, and eventually it may even be a retinal scan that is used as well for identification purposes. Okay, so anyway, we can see how technology is going to fit into this global scenario that's going to develop. They'll be gathered together. Verse 22, as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and they will be shut up in the prison, and after many days they will be punished. Then the moon will be disgraced, and the sun ashamed, for the Lord of hosts will reign on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem and before the elders gloriously. So there will come a moment, right? Isaiah takes this from an example of the flood to the end of the world, to even after the millennium when the earth is made new, and yeah, there will be a king that reigns, there will be a world system, and the king that reigns gloriously in Jerusalem, and that'll be God himself. That'll be the Messiah, God himself. Okay. Now, go from there, flip over to the next book, a couple pages to Jeremiah chapter 4. Again, Jeremiah is a contemporary of Isaiah.
Chapter what?
Chapter 4 of Jeremiah. And you got to remember, John is privy to all this information, right? But John is going to get more specific in the book of Revelation. John knows exactly where things are going to go, but he's going to get more specific. Under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he's going to get more specific with the ultimate closing of probationary time. Okay? All right, Jeremiah chapter 4, come down to verse 23. Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23. And Jeremiah says, here's a different guy, different prophet. I beheld the earth, and indeed it was without form and void, and the heavens had no light. Well, wait a minute, that sounds like creation, doesn't it? Isn't that the same thing that was used? That's the same language that we find when God was creating the world. It was null and void, it was kind of dark, and God stepped in and he started to develop it, right? Okay. Well, the earth, after this 6,000-year cycle has run of time, the earth comes back to, the earth has run full cycle and has come back to this same place.
From dust back to dust.
Right. So, exactly. Same premise there, right? He says, I beheld the mountains, and indeed they trembled. And all, A-double-L, the hills moved back and forth. Well, now that's a global quake. The book of Revelation talks about several earthquakes. At one point it talks about a global quake, right? That global quake does not occur until the coming of the Lord. Okay? Chapter 6 of Revelation deals with that. Chapter 16 of Revelation deals with that. There are 2 or 3 references that talk about this global quake, right? But it's occurring, of course, it's mentioned here, at the second coming of Christ. Okay?
Mine says the hills move lightly. Does that mean like the hills were light and they were just like taken away, or does that mean like they just moved like slightly or lightly?
Well, when it says the hills move back and forth, it definitely is an indication of a global shaking that's going on.
Well, mine just said the mountains moved lightly.
What translation is that?
This would be King James.
King James.
King James.
I'm in the New King. Okay.
This is King James.
Yeah, I mean, it basically just means reeled to and fro.
Right.
It was just translated to lightly, like
Right.
basically means they were moving.
Right. Verse 25 there says, I beheld, and indeed there was no man. Wow. The earth becomes depopulated, and all the birds of heavens had fled. They're not around any longer either. I beheld, and indeed the fruitful land was
It's a wilderness.
a wilderness, and ALL, its cities, ALL, and all its cities were broken down at what?
The presence.
The presence of the Lord by his fierce anger. So, again, when God comes back, this is when Christ actually comes, you have a global quake then, and of course this shaking, right? Every mountain and island, as it says in Revelation, they disappear. You have incredible, because of the tectonic movements, you have incredible tsunamis take place. I mean, things are sinking, things are being broken down. All the cities are being broken down because, they're just mortar, basic, and asphalt. They're all being shaken apart and burned down.
This,
Look at verse 27 here.
Anybody who needs to comment, they need to comment on the website because this just now restarted and I don't have anything left anymore.
Okay.
Okay.
So
I've got the-
anybody
I've
who
got
needs
the
to comment,
sign-ups.
they need to comment on the website so I can read it.
Okay, well, thanks, Sid, for bringing that out. Okay.
I don't know why this just restarted.
Did we lose an internet connection for a second, or?
Oh,
there's
Still
another
good?
state of the
no, this just
people.
restarted.
Okay. All right, verse 27 says, For thus says the Lord, the whole land shall be what?
Desolate.
Shall be desolate. Yet I will not make a full end. So even after the Lord comes and everything is broken down, right? It's still, the planet is still here. Okay?
Well,
The planet is still here, even though the lights have been turned out. There's no life on the planet except for angelic life, demonic life, I should say. Demonic and fallen angels are still here. But there's no human life anymore that's alive. Okay?
he's not going to make a full end until he recreates the earth.
Right, after the millennium, after the audit.
Okay, let's get stuff back up again.
Verse 28 says, Thus shall the earth mourn, and the heavens shall be black. It says, Because I have spoken, I have purposed, and will not relent, nor will I turn back from, etc. It says, The whole city shall flee from the noise of the horsemen and the bowmen. In other words,
Wow.
there's going to be no human activity that exists after this point. No human activity, okay, on the planet. All right. So John is privy. John has all this insight, and so as he's writing the book of Revelation, he's getting a little more specific about these things. Go back to Revelation chapter 8 for a minute. Revelation chapter 8. Now, remember last week we talked about these first four trumpets. And again, I can understand completely why people would say, "Oh, this isn't literal. These aren't literal natural disasters taking place. This is symbolic of people in history, doing various things, etc." I can understand why people would go there, because when you think about these things literally taking place, you're talking about a tremendous amount of devastation on the planet. But that's just what Jeremiah, that's just what Isaiah brought out that will occur at the second coming of the Lord and prior to the close of probationary
Well,
time.
the flood was really a devastation too.
Yeah, we live on a
This is
ship.
gonna
We live on a
come up.
shipwrecked planet in a sense because the canopy took out all of our protection, right, basically. And so we've had a decrease in barometric pressure. We've got a decrease in electromagnetic field. We have a decrease in the oxygen level. So we've got lots of things,
Not to mention meteorites not being deflected.
Yeah, we've lots of things that have left us vulnerable. That's exactly what the psalmist says. The psalmist says the earth is waxing old like a garment. The only way the earth could wax old as a garment is if the protections were taken out of place. All right? And that occurred, of course, during the flood.
And it starts deteriorating from there. That was
Sure.
the first deterioration.
All right, so when we go back to chapter 8, we find these first 4 trumpets that are sounding. How much of nature is being impacted here?
All? And
Okay,
1/3.
you could say all, but specific. I think there's a reason why it says 1/3. One third of this takes place under each of the trumpets here. These first 4, you have a third being, I would say, dramatically impacted. Okay, remember, God's interested. God's motive and intention here is to wake people up, to get people's attention, right? That something significant is about to take place. Right? So I see a third of nature being dramatically, adversely impacted by these first 4 trumpets. Okay? You can see how they affect, that we talked last week about the food supply, right? In land and in the water. About the water supply being contaminated. So your food and your water are being adversely impacted by, I would say, at least a third of the planet. Right? Third of the planet. Well, who else is a part of nature? Who else is a part of nature?
We are?
Humanity. Humanity is a part of, we are an intricate part of nature, right? So if 1/3 of nature is being adversely impacted, is it a logical step? Could we come to a reasonable conclusion that 1/3 of humanity is going to be adversely affected by these? I think that's a logical step to take. I think that's a logical conclusion, that if the food supply and the water supply are being adversely affected and a third is being highlighted here, that I think it's reasonable to say that a third of humanity. Now let's say by this time we have like 7.6 billion people. Don't we have like 7.6 billion people in the world today? Somewhere in that neighborhood. Maybe it's 7.4. I don't know, it's getting up to 7, it's either 7.5 or over, right? People in the world today. I think the latest stat that I looked at is you have about 400,000 people that are born every day. About 400,000 people a day are being born into the world. Obviously that figure could go either way, a little bit here and there. But if you've got 7.5 billion, maybe by the time these trumpets actually fall, which could be, and I say this in all sincerity, within the next 10 years, easily, the next 5 to 10 years, all of these things could be playing out. I believe when the first trumpet occurs, there's a cycle, a sequence, and a cycle of time that is initiated when the first trumpet falls. And you're going to know when the first trumpet falls. We talked about that a little bit. I think that maybe it's either several volcanic eruptions or it's a meteor shower. Every year, though we go through several meteor belts.
I'm not sure the context of what JD was talking about, but they asked, is it because a third of the angels fell? This is related to earlier about the nature.
The 1/3, I think.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting that you had a third of the angelic angels siding with Lucifer, eventually Satan. I don't know if I don't see any connection in regard to the fact that 1/3 of humanity may be taken out or adversely affected at that time.
Yeah, pretty much 7.6 billion.
Ellen White makes an interesting statement when you do a study of hers on angels. Ellen White makes a statement on her study on angels that the redeemed humanity, now we're talking about the righteous, we're talking about the saints, right? The people that are redeemed. Is that going to be a small number or a big number compared to the amount of people on the planet?
Comparatively small.
Okay, it's going to be a relatively small number compared to the number of people that have lived. They estimate that about 100 to 110 billion people have lived on our planet thus far. Okay, so out of 110 billion people on the planet, the number of redeemed, the number of the saints, the number of people that experience eternal life is going to be relatively small. Even though I believe it'll be in the millions, it's going to be relatively small compared to that number. But Ellen White makes an interesting statement. She says that, in response to JD's question there, or comment, she makes an interesting statement that the redeemed saints will replace the void that was created in heaven by a third of the angels departing. A third of the angels were kicked out. The redeemed saints fill that void, so to speak, that was left there. Okay. In other words, instead of God saying, "Well, I've lost a third of my angels, my special messengers. I'm just going to blink my eyes, snap my fingers, and create the replacements." Redeemed humanity ends up replacing. And that was one of her comments that she made. So in regards to that, but as nature is affected by a third here, I think the reason that that's happening is, I think the reason that that's happening is because we've had, for 4,000 years, we've had earthquakes, floods, famines, hurricanes, pestilence. We've had all kind of natural disasters. Back in, 2000, when was it, 2004 or 5? When did all the people in Indonesia from the tsunami die? Day after Christmas. That was a couple, 5-10 years
It's been a
ago?
while.
Oh, but
It was 10 years ago, wasn't it? Wasn't it 2004?
Something
I
like
can't remember
that.
the date. Anyway, 250,000 people died as a result of the tsunami. That is astounding. I mean, and literally just,
I think these
hours.
are going to be intensified in measure,
Right.
So it's going to affect the people
right.
to have that kind of a devastation.
For example, if this is a horrific meteor shower that sets ablaze all the grasslands and all the wheat that's growing, the barley and the corn, all the different grasslands are hit by meteor impacts that set the whole place ablaze, and lots of trees are burned up, etc. If a third of humanity is impacted, that is definitely going to get everybody's attention. I don't care who you are, that's going to get your attention, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, plus you think that would do simple things like jack up the price of food by...
Everybody. That's
Astronomical
exactly
amounts.
it. The 2/3 that are left, everybody's going to be impacted by this. Everybody. So you're going to get everybody's attention when this occurs. Okay. As compared to, now, yeah, okay, the tsunami back Boxing Day, whatever year that was. Okay, that did get the world's attention, but did it have the same kind of impact? People were probably saying, well, when an earthquake like that occurs, the potential for tsunami is there. And it's happened in the past, it'll happen in the future, it's just one of those unfortunate things if you happen to be there. 250,000 people died. That's significant, okay? Very significant. But these trumpets, when they fall, that's going to be...
Billions of people.
we're not talking, right, hundreds of thousands now, we're talking potentially billions of people, okay, impacted. And the entire world's going to be impacted, but billions of people losing their lives, right? So that's just the other thing I wanted to bring out in regards to that. Now, I'm going to fast forward here. I'm not going to focus on this too much, but look at Revelation chapter 9. Revelation chapter 9. And we're not going to focus there on this. That's a part that we're not going to get to today. But that's under the sixth trumpet. When you go to the sixth trumpet, what does it say there? Now let's just think about this for a minute. If you've got the first four trumpets taking out a third of humanity, that's billions of losses. Okay, that's a horrific time for the planet. A horrific time for the planet. But then by the time you get to the sixth trumpet, whoever's left, you've got, of course, billions of people still left. What happens under the sixth trumpet? Release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates, the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and the day and the month and the year, were released to kill a third of mankind. So here under the sixth trumpet, you've got a third of mankind being killed. Now I'm just going to tell you flat out that you probably still have the after effects and the results of the first four trumpets that are lingering, having an impact still adversely on the 2/3 that are left. But now you've got a different element taking place. you've got a different element being introduced in the fifth and sixth trumpet. Okay? And that's warfare. That's warfare on the planet. So under the sixth trumpet, it's identified that another third, I think now we're talking another third. So now we've got 2/3 of humanity being actually taken out.
Well, just think it's almost kind of like a thing of dominoes, because if you have
Yeah,
most of the
absolutely.
food being taken out of the
Boom,
picture, now you're going to have
boom,
people
boom.
fighting over the food.
Fighting over the food, fighting for control, right, or where the clean water is, right. All right, so with all that being said, I want to go to chapter 8 and verse 13. Chapter 8 and verse 13. Okay, we've looked at the first 4 trumpets last week. Verse 13 says, "And I looked, and now I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice." All right, when we looked at the sequence of trumpets when they started to sound, John just goes, here's the first one sounded, and this happened. Here's the second one sounded, and this happened. Here's the third one, etc. Here's the fourth one. There's a pause. There's a disconnect, right? And it's done for a reason. Why? Well, there's a major difference between the first 4 trumpets and the last 3 trumpets. Okay? What's the difference?
Last 3 are supernatural.
They're called woes.
Pardon me?
Last 3 are supernatural.
Okay, the difference is there's a supernatural element that is injected, right, into the sounding of these. You know, there are some people out there that believe that when the first trumpets sound, the first 4 trumpets sound, that's God intentionally doing things. That's God contaminating the water, and that's God. And in other words, God is actually, His wrath is doing these things. I'm not so sure, because the Bible says that the earth is waxing old like a garment. And of course, what are we doing as human beings to our atmosphere right now?
Polluting it,
We are contaminating, we are
Tearing the
distorting it,
water,
we are tearing it down.
mining.
We are just messing with the atmosphere ourselves, and we've been doing it for 50 years.
And actually, we've been lifting the atmosphere and dropping it and damaging it even more every time.
We've been doing it for 50 years at least.
Australia already
Okay.
has a hole in their atmosphere.
Yeah. So I'm not so sure that the first 4 trumpets are really God just kind of holding. In other words, the angels in Revelation 7, remember they're holding back the winds of strife? I see them just kind of letting go. The trumpets are just them letting go, and just naturally the planet is responding to God not preserving it any longer. Okay? He's just stepping back out of the way a little bit, letting his grip go, and nature itself, the natural thing is just taking place. How long has the Earth been going through meteor belts as it goes through space? How long has that been happening?
A couple thousands.
Thousands and thousands, maybe since the very beginning, but thousands of years for certain, right? Right? So meteor impacts were instrumental in causing the flood event. God allowed that to take place. Okay? For the first 1650 years, God prevented impacts from taking place on the planet. Right? God steps back out of the way and the planet is pummeled. Just like when you look at the moon, it's just full of craters. The earth, if you take away the vegetation and the water, it's full of craters. Some huge impact zones. The earth was hit by meteors, the earth was hit by asteroids in the past. That's what the record indicates. That's what science indicates, right? So that's been going on. I mean, God has had His hand over our planet for a long time. It's when He steps out of the way that nature does the damage itself. I don't think God had to intentionally. I don't think God had to sit up there, like with a pea shooter and shoot meteorites down onto the planet to qualify for the first trumpet. I think He just allows nature to take its course, and we experience the result. Okay, but now.
And we have the laws of nature because of Him, so.
Exactly. So now, in verse 13 here, there's a disconnect. There's a difference being highlighted here. And the last 3 trumpets are also called woes. And that's because of 13 here. I looked and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the United States, of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound." So there's a difference between the first four and the last three. What's that difference?
Well, I tell you what, that last three is going to really be tough.
Well, if you go to your concordance and look up woes, if you look up the word woe, it basically means alas, woe. It means
With a
grief.
warning.
It means grief. Grief is coming. Okay, and when you say that 3 times in a row, it's like, I call it the Richter scale effect. Right? Why do I call it the Richter scale effect? 3 isn't a lot more than 1, but every time you say it, you magnify it, you multiply it, you don't just add another one. You know, when you go from one woe to a second woe, you're not just adding one woe, you are multiplying and magnifying that like a Richter scale effect. It's the same thing with a Richter scale, if you understand how that works. If you say an earthquake was 6 on the Richter scale, that's a pretty moderate to heavy earthquake. But if you say it was a 6.1, well, now you've not just added one little tenth to it, you've magnified it tremendously. Every little 6.2, 6.3, you're magnifying that, multiplying that tremendously, not just adding a little tenth to it, you know, that kind of thing. So I call these woes the Richter
Richter
scale. Yeah.
Richter, whoa.
Richter woe. See, in fact, that's exactly what I wrote. Richter woe effect. Okay. The word woe is used over 100 times in the Bible. So you know what? Sin has caused so much grief on our planet over 6,000 years. It's almost unbelievable to me. I mean, let's put it this way. You would have to be God himself to be able to withstand it. Does that make sense? In order to withstand all the grief and the woe that has been unleashed on this planet, human to human, animal to human, natural disasters, supernaturally things inspired, right? You'd have to be God to be able to withstand all that pain and all that grief. You really would. A person, I mean, when you look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the reason he was going to die there is because he was experiencing the grief, the overwhelming amount of grief and that was on this planet. And that you know, that the whole thing, the whole ball of wax he was getting, he was going to die. If you were able to somehow experience all the grief and all the woe that this planet, it would kill you. It would just kill you, literally. You could never handle it. Okay? You could just never handle it.
That's the reason they sent an angel to help him out.
Exactly. So now the world is not just one woe, but woe, woe, woe on this planet. And let me just take you to a couple of them. There are lots of characteristics when you start looking up these verses, right? In 1 Samuel 4, I want to go back to the 1 Samuel, all the way back there. When you start looking these things up, it starts to tell a story. It starts to reveal. 1 Samuel chapter 4. And I want you to I'm just reading, I'll read a couple of these verses here, and just to give you 1 Samuel chapter 4, and the Ark of the Covenant has been captured. Talks about that. The very first verse there said, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out to battle against the Philistines and encamped beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped in Aphek, and the Philistines put themselves in battle array against Israel. Well, anyway, they captured the Ark of the Covenant, right? Well, anyway, when you get down further in the chapter there, verse 6 says, "Now when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, what does the sound of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. So they recaptured, they took it back, right? So the Philistines were afraid, verse 7 there, and they said, "God has come into the camp." And they said, what did they say to themselves?
Woe unto us.
Woe unto us. Okay? See, here you have the supernatural element coming into the equation. And they said, woe is us. And that's the exact same thing that's happening here in the book of Revelation. The supernatural element is coming into the equation, and the world says, woe is us. But not just one woe. Woe, woe, woe. Okay? Because there are three trumpets yet to sound. All right? Woe is us. Let me read a couple of these other ones. Again, I wrote down probably 20 references at least that gave you a character of woe. Ecclesiastes 10:16, loneliness, being alone, facing a crisis by yourself. That's part of grief and part of a woe. When people are facing a crisis, they want somebody there with them. When Jesus was going to face his crisis in Gethsemane, what did he want?
Them to pray with him.
He wanted some companionship. He wanted, pray with me. Please stay awake and pray with me. I need you right now. When people are facing a crisis, they want somebody. They want to know there's somebody else there in their corner that's with them, that's there to help them, to comfort them, etc. That's just natural, right? But loneliness is a part of this woe when facing a crisis. That's Ecclesiastes 10:16. Isaiah 3:9. Even it says evil as Sodom. It's talking about how Israel will become as evil as Sodom, right? And it's just those verses that say, what you sow, you're going to reap. That's part of this woe thing. If you're evil, you're going to reap grief and woe, etc. Isaiah had a lot to say about this. Isaiah 3:9, 5:11, 5:18, 5:20, 5:22, Isaiah 6:5, Isaiah 17:12, okay, Isaiah 28:1, 29:15, 30 verse 1, 33 verse 1. And it talks about this grief or this woe is drunkenness, it's vanity, it's calling good evil and evil good, it's being wise in your own eyes. It's being, Isaiah 6:5, that famous verse is where Isaiah says, "Woe is me, for I am undone." What does it mean? What was he saying there to mean I'm undone? I'm ceasing, I'm perishing, I'm being destroyed, I'm being cut off. That's what it means to experience woe. This is what the world is going to be experiencing to a greater degree on these last three trumpets. Here's an interesting one in Isaiah 17:12. Let me just share that one with you right here real quick. Isaiah 17:12. 17 verse 12, it says, "Woe to the multitude of many people who make a noise like a roar of the seas, and to the rushing of nations, and make a rustling like the rushing of mighty waters." I just thought that was interesting that, God is specifically saying, woe to the multitude. When you're in a multitude, you're not lonely, you're not facing the crisis alone. But why woe to the multitude? So there is some comfort when somebody's there to experience a crisis with you, right? But why are they moaning and grieving so like the roar of the sea? It's because of the horrific heartache that the whole group is facing. The tremendous amount of pain, suffering that the entire group is facing. Woe to the multitude, it says there.
It's just going to come up on them before they even know it. They won't even realize it till they're in it.
Yeah, I can imagine, those that before the flood. I can imagine that many of them were standing around the flood. Many people had probably congregated around the ark once Noah went inside because they wanted to ridicule him. They wanted to make fun of him and his family. They wanted to, heap aspersions and accusations on him, etc. I can just imagine the things that were being said. But then once that thunder clapped and the lightning maybe flashed and the rain started to fall, I bet they started looking at one another thinking,
Hey, you're right.
I wonder, And then as the downpour became more horrific and as the flood, as the earth opened up and so forth, things started to escalate to a catastrophe, I can imagine that there was a lot of moaning and groaning and a lot of grief collectively that was going on. So it was because they were
Wailing and gnashing of teeth.
they were, yeah, and see, even a multitude, a multitude has a certain amount of power, right? Just the very fact that you have numbers means that you have a certain amount of power.
JD said there's no comfort with these numbers.
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely no comfort. But with a multitude, you feel somewhat secure because of the multitude, because you have a certain amount of
I think you
power.
all made
Like I
the
said,
right
there's people who
decision.
think they have safety in numbers when,
Safety in numbers.
I mean, your own numbers is what kills you.
And all of a sudden, though, like Kenny's saying, you come to realization that you are not more powerful than the thing that's coming against you, even collectively. And so, yes, so you all begin to recognize that hope is lost at that point. Okay. But anyway, if you wanted to do a comprehensive study, just look up the word woe, and you'll come across these. Another interesting one, Jeremiah 23:1. Woe unto the pastors. It says that specifically. Why woe unto the pastors?
I'll tell you what, because they get in the New Testament and forget it.
Woe unto
All
the
right,
pastors.
then.
Woe unto the false prophets. There are other ones that talk about the false prophets, right? Why specifically does God mention that in Jeremiah 23? Because what have a lot of pastors and teachers, and they have a lot of influence over people, whether they want to realize it or not. They are taking a whole congregation usually in a certain direction. Scripture says, that study yourself. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that need not be ashamed. Right? But yet congregations are moving, sometimes whole groups of people, sometimes, maybe even millions of people in a certain direction. And where does the broad road take them? To destruction. Okay? Jeremiah says, woe unto pastors. I mean, think very seriously. If you're a pastor out there watching this, you better think very seriously. You have a tremendous responsibility of giving people what this word reveals. I know people don't like this subject because it's uncomfortable. But as a pastor, as a teacher, as a Bible teacher, you need to make sure that your congregation is informed about these things that are going to be coming upon the world. Woe unto the pastors, it says there. But woe unto those that grieve to my that grief to my sorrow, that are sorrowful and speak lies. Another one in Amos, the day of wrath and darkness and not light. That's what woe really, a characteristic of woe. The day of darkness and not light. Amos 6:1 is a famous saying. Woe unto them that are at ease in Zion. How many of you have heard that before? Woe unto those that are at ease in Zion. In other words, God's people, God's church at the end of time is considered what?
Asleep.
Laodicean. Not really interested, not really concerned. There's no urgency, etc., right? Because they're lukewarm, they're comfortable. Woe. Woe unto that condition. Those are at ease in Zion. Right? And again, there's some real other interesting ones here. I don't want to take a whole lot of time. But you got the Richter scale event. In other words, you've got a supernatural injection, right, into the equation here when you get to the fifth woe. Let's take a quick look at it. We've got a few minutes here. I want to just get to this part here. The fifth angel sounds, and it says, I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth. Now, asteroid, right? We would,
Looks
typically,
like-
we would literally think, okay, an asteroid, when we think of a star falling, you would think of an asteroid. But then look at the next part of the verse there. It's given a personality. Why is it given a personality? Because it says, to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Well, now that changes the equation, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Right. A star could be what? A star in Scripture could also mean
angel.
an angel or a messenger, right? So now John specifically takes it in that direction with that next part there. To him was given a key to the bottomless pit. Now, from there, go over to verse 11. Just look
What?
across the page to verse 11. They had a king over them. This is right. They had a king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit. Right? So here you have this angel now, and it says to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. So there's a person who's in control, of the bottomless pit. It's identified now as an angel. And even more specifically, in Hebrew, he even gives his name. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon. In the Greek, it is Apollyon. Okay, so this angel, this star, we could actually give a name to this star then. This star is Apollyon. This star is Abaddon. And what is that interpreted? What do those words mean?
The destroyer?
The destroyer. This star is the destroyer. Okay, well that could be still an asteroid, right? But it's given a personality where him and he, right? He opened the bottomless pit. So this person, this fallen angel, if you will, has the ability to open the bottomless pit, right? He opens the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. The sun was darkened because of the smoke of the pit, right? Out of the pit, out of the smoke comes this locust upon the earth. So, I mean, this is all, kind of hyperbole, right? This is language that doesn't seem to make any sense to us. If we're thinking from a literal standpoint, you got these bugs, coming out of smoke and all that. What does it really mean? What's John trying to tell us here? Is he tapping into some Old Testament typology, right? Where is he going? He's going. Doesn't this reference Joel, the second chapter of the book Joel, right? What's the smoke? What's this locust coming out of smoke here? These locusts were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth. I mean, wouldn't that be normally what locusts would do? Locusts would normally go to green things and decimate a field or trees or shrubs or bushes. That's what normally bugs would do. But these are commanded not to do that, right? Or any green thing or any tree. But only, and of course that's what affected, isn't that what the first 4 trumpets affected? The first 4 trumpets affected those things. But now, these locusts are commanded not to harm those things, but what? Only those men who did not have the seal of God in their foreheads. Or who are the people that have the seal of God in their forehead? When do people have the seal of God in their forehead?
The close of probation?
Near the close of probationary time, right? So that gives us the where. Who are the ones that have the seal of God in their foreheads?
Covenant keepers.
That's the 144,000, right? The 144,000 are the ones that are sealed. So again, we're talking about near the close of probationary time. We're talking about people that are sealed. Well, if God's people are sealed, right, who are the ones that are being affected by the plagues of the earth? Who are the ones that are going to be affected by the warfare that's coming upon the world?
Sounds like the wicked.
The wicked, right? So these locusts, right? So who could we say really the locusts are only to affect the wicked? They're not to affect the righteous. They were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months.
That's when the scorpions sting them or something like
Right.
that.
Right. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man, right? And of course that causes, a scorpion injects, well, it stings a man, but it injects a poison into a man, and it could be fatal, right? I mean, it could
Can
be
be.
fatal. Huh?
Could be.
Can be.
It can be, you know. But so here you have these bugs supposedly poisoning this humanity. I mean, are we literally talking about bugs, or who are we really talking about here?
I know what the scorpions are. One of them stung
Before you get super far,
Sid on the arm.
Go
before
ahead.
you get super far, JD was talking about when you were talking about the preachers.
Right.
I said instead of teaching from the whole word, they teach from only the New Testament.
You know, that is such an important thing that JD's bringing up there. That there are people that pick and choose what part of this book
They
wanna
want to
listen to.
listen.
they want to listen to and they want to follow. You know.
That's really common though.
You know, oh yeah, we want to take our pen and our eraser and say we want to erase this part out. And of course over here we want to add in First Opinions 3:3,
I
you know,
believe every
and-
word.
because tradition says this is what we do. So even though the book is pretty clear, we're going to erase that part. We're going to pencil through that. We don't really want to follow that. That's an important thing.
There's not that many people believe it all anyway.
No, not really. And I don't think anybody can even know it all. I don't think we can get it all into our heads. I think we can know enough to go in the right direction. I think we can know enough to be one in development for the 144,000. Yeah, we can know enough. We're never going to know all, but we can know enough. And but at the end, God has an expectation that His people will learn that song that the 144,000 sing. Okay. All right. So back here, are we talking about bugs that affect the righteous? Who are we talking about here? Who's the destroyer?
Satan.
Okay, does Satan. I mean, I guess Satan could use.
It could be
Yeah,
angels.
to righteous.
Satan could use bugs, I guess, to cause some pain and suffering on people. But what else would he rather control? He has all of fallen humanity, right? You've got this, by this time here, you've got the saints on one side. You've got all the rest of fallen humanity, whoever's left, on the other side, right? And so, what's his number one purpose? What's the number one purpose of Satan? What's his number one goal?
To get rid of everybody.
Perpetuate his own existence.
Yeah.
Okay?
Survival.
Now, in order to perpetuate his own existence, who does he have to get rid of?
The righteous.
Christians.
Anybody that's righteous, he has to get
So
rid
you can
of.
say that the world's mine.
So the world is mine. Okay, so that we got to keep that in mind, right? As we go to this period of time. So, in order to get rid of the righteous, what's the best method that he's found has worked time and
You
time
gotta
again?
kill them.
Kill them off. How's he going to kill them off?
War.
With everybody else who's under his control, right? Instead of him running around doing a lot of dirty work, and God, of course, God preventing that, because he would do that if he could, but he can inspire humanity, fallen humanity, to take up arms, to take up anything, and get rid of the righteous. And that's really what's going on here. Look, and here's why. Look at chapter 12. We'll finish with this. How do we know that this is Satan? How do we know that well, we know that this is a destroyer. That's the intent, to destroy all the righteous.
I don't think we'd have any trouble if we'd have Satan.
Okay. Well, we still have that fallen human nature, but here you have all of the righteous being subjected to the cruelty of. In other words, it's Satan that opens the bottomless pit, right? It's Satan that motivates these people to come out and really they can't attack, they can't have any effect on those that are sealed, but they can cause a lot of pain and suffering. Why would Satan cause a lot of pain and suffering on all the unrighteous? There's a purpose here.
Trying
God.
to get them to turn over to
Well,
him.
no, there's a hurt God. What?
To motivate them to do something.
To blame somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to blame. Oh, those people over there, they're not being affected. They're causing the problem. So Satan uses this. He comes down, interjects himself, supernatural interjection into the equation under the fifth trumpet, to motivate fallen humanity to do his dirty work and get rid of the righteous. Okay, and the way you motivate them, you cause pain, you cause grief, you cause woe. All right.
He thinks he can get to control the earth forever.
Revelation chapter 12. Look, Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. Go over there for a sec. And look at verse 12.
12:12. Is what you want us to read?
12:12. Here's another woe. Okay? I'm just following, I'm starting halfway down. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows
He has a short
that
time.
he has a short time. Satan knows his time is running out, so he has to step into our reality specifically. And why? And listen, why not? This is logical. Didn't Messiah have? And this is one of the reasons why I believe this period of time here will be a 3.5-year period of time, right? Because not only do the natural disasters, Ellen White says in Great Controversy that the world starts to look at the righteous negatively after all the natural disasters. And so if all these natural disasters are
They
occurring,
blame us for them.
they start blaming the saints, right? Even though there'll be saints that'll be killed in some of these natural disasters. Remember, this is before probation closes. So a lot of the righteous, there'll be lots of righteous that are laid to rest. Some maybe even killed in these natural disasters as well, right? Everything that happens under the trumpets, right? The righteous are potentially subjected to them as well. Okay, so you've got maybe millions of righteous people going up to the time before probation closes. You only have the 144,000 in number only comes into play after probation closes. Okay, all after they're in development, of course. God knows who He's going to choose, but by the time He gets there. But you've got millions of righteous people that are witnessing to people, trying to do the right thing. They're going to be laid to rest because God is choosing the ones that will go through the difficult time of trouble. All right? So, but Satan here knows that he has a short time, and so he has to step into our reality. It makes sense to me, it's quite logical to me, that just like Messiah had his 1,260 days of ministry, Satan will say, I get my time. I get my 1,260 days. Oh yeah, Lord, if you're going to be fair, I need to have my 1,200. I need to have my 3.5 years of time to make things happen. He's going to take his time right when he thinks he has the greatest advantage. And the greatest advantage would be after the earth is decimated through natural disasters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be the most advantageous time for him to step in and say, I am here to save everyone. I am here to be the great Savior. I'm here to work everything out to get us back on track. You know, I mean, you can just hear the rhetoric, right?
Which is when Paul brings out in Corinthians that the devil will appear as an angel of light.
It appears an angel of light. Exactly. And of course, intent
He's gonna
and hell-bent on just deceiving. In other words, he is a dragon and he is a serpent. All right? A serpent is a deceptive power, like in the Garden.
Dragon is the forceful one who'll be.
The dragon is the persecuting power. Okay? Satan will get to the place, he has to get to the place where he has
to
to
be a dragon.
cause persecution, right? It says what does it say in that same chapter there, chapter 12? The dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war. That's the sixth. That's the fifth and sixth trumpet right there. The dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war.
The miracles he's going to be
Church.
able to do is going to convince everybody
Yeah.
just about that's left.
So you have the true. We have to be quite careful. Not the corporation, but the true believers, the true church, not the corporation, not those that have their names, in some corporate role, but the true believers. The dragon was wroth, and word is enraged. The dragon was enraged with the woman and went to make war. That is the detail John is describing under the fifth and sixth trumpets, okay? So we're going to end with that. I just wanted you to bring out the fact that Satan does step into our reality. That's occurring under the fifth trumpet there. That's what's happening there. That's yet future, right? We can make applications in the past. There were lots of people in the past that we could make application to. Attila the Hun, I think, is one of the most favorite that people say is the fifth trumpet, is Attila the Hun. All right, that may be a legitimate application. That is not the ultimate. That is not the ultimate fulfillment.
Because we haven't seen
Okay.
any of the other trumpets. I mean,
There you go. Well, they would say before Attila the Hun, there was this guy, there was
this
Odiezer,
disaster.
and there was, these other people back there. They ascribe these things to people in history, and that may be a good application, but it is not the ultimate fulfillment. That is yet in front of us. Okay. All right. Thanks for your comments. Thank you guys for commenting, and please continue to study these things. We'll pick this up. We'll pick up and focus on the sixth trumpet next week. Okay, and I think we should be able to. What's really interesting is the fifth and sixth trumpets. You have to understand this. Are so important. They have 2.5 chapters of the Bible devoted to understanding the fifth and sixth trumpet. That's incredible. That's a critical place. A critical place. 2.5 chapters of the Bible. The rest of well, of course, you got chapter 10, chapter 11, and halfway through chapter 11, you don't get to the seventh sounding of the angel till chapter 11, verse 15. So you're halfway through chapter 11 before you get to the seventh trumpet. So the fifth and sixth trumpets have 2.5 chapters. Right? Chapter 9, chapter 10, and half of chapter 11. 2.5 chapters of the Bible devoted to this personation. Ellen White calls it a personation. What's the difference between a personation and an impersonation? What's an imposter? What's an impersonation?
pretending to be somebody.
Okay, pretending to be somebody else.
Impersonation.
But what is a personation? Ellen White says that what happens here is a
Taking their
personation.
identity in a sort.
Well, that would be under an impersonation.
Would it?
Trying to take somebody's identity, trying to be
He's gonna
somebody
try
else.
to convince
But what's a
everybody
personation?
He's Jesus.
That would be
Pardon me?
like-
He's going to try to make everybody believe he is Jesus, to come to save them.
Right, and of course,
Well, that's impersonation.
we could say that he's an imposter,
Imposter.
right? But Ellen White says he is personating Jesus Christ.
Which means he's taking on the form.
He's an exact replica. Okay, if I was going to impersonate, let's say there's ventriloquists and whatnot, they do impersonations with their voice, and they may be able to sound like Ronald Reagan or somebody else,
But they don't look like
but they
that.
don't look like him. Okay, so you might be able to sound like another person, and you be able to do things to impersonate a person's actions or abilities.
Sound like a duck, still a dog.
Right. But a personation is somebody that sounds like, somebody that looks like, somebody that does like, somebody that acts like, somebody that for all intents and purposes is. Okay? And when Satan personates Christ's second coming,
He's
Right.
going to be able
he's
to
going to
do-
show up acting like, looking like, sounding like. And why does it say in the Bible, Matthew, that if possible, even the very elect could be deceived? You see?
Mhm.
It's going to be, in fact, she also calls this, right? She also calls this personation an almost overwhelming deception.
The only
Right.
thing is,
Almost
he's not
everybody's
going to come down like Jesus.
There you go. And that is so important, Ken. That is so important to remember
Like
the
that-
manner.
Well,
The
really, it
manner.
doesn't touch the
Once
ground.
he comes.
Yeah, he is not allowed. He's not allowed to personate that. He's not allowed to actually do that. And of course, then the Christians, the true Christians, know that it can't be Jesus because he doesn't come down on
Coming
this
right
earth.
way.
Okay, so important to understand that. We'll emphasize that again next week. Anyway, time for Elijah. It's time for Elijah.
The coming of Elijah.
Another coming of Elijah to have our closing prayer. So, thank you, everybody.
Yes. Lord, we thank you so much for the Sabbath day, that you've allowed us to come together as a family and as a group here to study these things in Revelation that you've left for us. And as we continue to study deeper into the trumpets and the things that you have put there for us to study, we ask that you would prepare our hearts and our minds in the coming weeks, that we could properly understand these things, as they're very controversial in nature, and help us to understand with clarity and with exactness the things that you need us to understand to prepare us for that time.
Amen.
And of course, help us to be ready and fitted up with all the knowledge of the Word that we can get, and with the power of your Holy Spirit to withstand these deceptions and these things that are coming. And prepare us to be among, if not a part of your 144,000. Is my prayer in your Son Jesus' name. Amen.
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 And Lord bless our community, our fellowship,
Yeah.
and all that we experience on your wonderful day. Okay? And amen and amen. Okay, well, thank you guys for your comments and so forth, and thank you for joining us once again. Hope this was informative. And again, remember, the righteous have nothing to fear. All these things that are coming upon us. In fact, God's people are fearless because His Spirit is dwelling in us, and nothing can take that from us. So God's people are fearless. So just remember that, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same place. May God bless and have a great and wonderful week. Amen.
Amen.